The soft hum of conversation filled the restaurant, blending with the clinking of cutlery and the faint tune of a piano playing somewhere in the background. Waiters moved briskly between tables, trays balanced expertly, while laughter rippled through the air. It was one of those places where time seemed to move slower, where everything felt warm, polished, and just a little bit perfect. Ethan Cole sat alone by the window, his tailored suit impeccable, his phone lighting up every few seconds with new messages from investors, assistants, and business partners. To anyone watching, he looked like what he was, a billionaire who had everything a man could want. But behind the quiet confidence in his posture, there was an emptiness that wealth couldn't hide. He stirred his coffee absently, staring out at the city beyond the glass, his reflection faintly overlapping the lights outside. Then something shifted, a small movement at the corner of his vision. He glanced toward a modest table near the back of the room. There a woman sat with two children, a boy and a girl, both with messy hair and clothes that had clearly seen better days. The woman, though dressed simply, carried a quiet grace. Her hands trembled slightly as she cut the food in front of her, portioning it carefully onto 3 small plates. It wasn't the meal that caught Ethan's attention. It was how she did it. Slowly, thoughtfully, making sure her kids got the larger portions, pretending not to notice that she was left with barely a few bites for herself. The little boy looked up, his brow furrowing. "Mommy, you didn't take any." She smiled faintly, pushing a forkful of food toward him. "I'm not hungry, sweetheart. You eat for me, okay?" The girl frowned, glancing between them. "But you said you didn't have lunch today." Her mother hesitated for a heartbeat, then brushed a strand of hair from the girl's face. "That's okay, baby. Mommies don't get hungry when their kids are full." Ethan froze mid-sip, his throat tightening. It was such a simple moment, but it hit him like a blow. He'd seen grand gestures, charity galas, $1,000,000 donations, fancy speeches about compassion. But this was love stripped bare, real, quiet, selfless. He couldn't look away. The way she smiled through exhaustion, the way her eyes lingered on her children, full of tenderness and pain all at once. He noticed how the boy carefully slid his plate a little closer to her when she wasn't looking. How the girl whispered, "We can share, Mommy." And how she smiled again, even as her eyes glistened with tears she quickly blinked away. Ethan leaned back, setting his coffee down. For the first time in a long while, the world around him seemed to fade. The noise, the chatter, the luxury. All he saw was them, a family clinging to love in a world that hadn't given them much else. He thought of his own childhood, of a time before the money, before the empire, when his mother had done the same thing, pretending she'd already eaten so he wouldn't worry. He hadn't remembered that in years. Now it came rushing back, sharp and heavy. He looked down at his untouched meal, an expensive steak barely touched, and something inside him stirred. Guilt, sadness, but also something more. He called for the waiter, his voice quieter than usual. "Excuse me," he said, eyes still on the small family across the room. "Can you do me a favor?" The waiter nodded, leaning in. "Of course, sir." Ethan hesitated, then glanced up. "When that woman asks for the bill, tell her it's already taken care of." The waiter blinked. "By you, sir?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, but don't tell her who." As the waiter walked away, Ethan sat back in his chair, eyes still fixed on the small family. He didn't know who they were. He didn't even know their names. But something about them, that quiet act of love, and had cracked open a part of his heart he thought was long gone. He didn't realize it yet, but in that small, tender moment, his life had already begun to change. The waiter approached the small table with a polite smile, holding the bill discreetly in his hand. The mother looked up, startled, immediately fumbling in her purse. It was old and worn, the kind with faded stitching and a broken zipper that caught every time she tried to open it. "How much is it?" she asked softly, glancing at her two children who were busy licking their spoons clean, giggling quietly at each other. The waiter shook his head gently. "It's already been paid for, ma'am." She blinked, confused. "What? No, that can't be right." "I haven't," he smiled kindly. "Someone wanted to make sure you and your kids enjoyed your evening." For a moment she just stared, her lips parting slightly. The disbelief in her eyes slowly turned to something else, a tremble, a wet shimmer that caught the light. She pressed a hand to her chest, her breath shaking. "Who would do that?" she whispered, half to herself. The waiter simply nodded, keeping the secret as instructed. They asked to stay anonymous. Across the room, Ethan watched the scene quietly, his gaze fixed on her face. She looked around the restaurant as if trying to find the mysterious benefactor, her eyes scanning each table. When her gaze almost met his, Ethan quickly looked away, pretending to scroll through his phone. Her son tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, what's wrong?" She blinked fast, forcing a smile. "Nothing, sweetheart. Someone just did something very kind for us." The little girl tilted her head. "Like an angel?" Her mother laughed softly, the sound shaky but warm. "Maybe, baby. Maybe an angel." Ethan felt a strange lump form in his throat at those words. It had been so long since he'd done something without expecting anything back. In his world, kindness was currency, a tool to build image and influence. But watching her eyes glisten with quiet gratitude, it didn't feel like a transaction. It felt pure. As the small family rose to leave, the mother wrapped her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, holding her kids' hands as if afraid to lose them in the crowd. Before she walked out, she turned once more, not knowing who to thank, but whispering anyway, "Whoever you are, thank you." Ethan caught her lips move, and even though he couldn't hear the words, he knew what she'd said. For a long moment after they left, he stayed seated, staring at the empty table they'd occupied. The half-finished plates, the napkin folded neatly beside the mother's chair. All traces of something quietly profound that had just happened. He exhaled, leaning back in his seat. It should have ended there, a small act of generosity, a fleeting moment. But it didn't. Something about that woman, the way she looked at her children, the exhaustion hidden behind her smile, stayed with him long after she was gone. He found himself imagining what her life must be like. Did she have to work 2 jobs? Was she worried about rent, about groceries, about tomorrow? He remembered her trembling hands when she divided the meal, the quiet pride in her voice when she told her children it was enough, the way she made just enough feel like love. It unsettled him, because for the first time in years, Ethan realized how empty his world had become. The deals, the mansions, the luxury. None of it filled that hollow space that used to hold something human. He didn't even know her name, but something deep inside whispered that their paths weren't meant to end here. That night, when he left the restaurant, he found himself glancing at every street corner, every bus stop, hoping, without understanding why, that he'd see her again. The next morning, Ethan sat in his office, staring blankly at his computer screen. The skyline outside stretched endlessly, a glittering reminder of everything he'd built. But his mind wasn't in the room. It was still at that restaurant, still seeing that mother's tired smile. He tried to focus on the numbers flashing before him, the reports his assistant handed over, but none of it mattered. The memory of her cutting that meal into 3 portions replayed in his mind like a quiet ache. "Sir, the investors from Tokyo are waiting on the call," his assistant reminded him. He nodded absently. "Tell them I'll join in 10 minutes. As soon as she left, he opened his laptop and began typing into the restaurant's booking system. It didn't take long to find her. The staff had written a note about a single mother dining with 2 kids whose meal had been covered anonymously. He asked them for her contact information under the pretense of offering a customer satisfaction gift. An hour later, he had her name. Clara Miller. He leaned back in his chair, saying the name under his breath. It felt familiar somehow, but he couldn't place it. That afternoon, as his car pulled up to the edge of the city, he spotted her walking along the sidewalk, holding her daughter's hand while her son skipped ahead. She carried a grocery bag that looked too heavy for her small frame, yet she smiled as her kids chatted beside her. Ethan didn't get out. He just watched from a distance, quietly unseen. The sight stirred something deep inside him, a mix of admiration and sadness. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking at someone through numbers or profit margins. He was simply seeing a woman doing her best, loving her children through struggle. And without realizing it, Ethan decided he wasn't done with this story yet. Later that evening, Clara sat at the small kitchen table of her tiny apartment, helping her children with their homework. The walls were thin, the lights dim, and the hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence between scribbles of pencils. The place was clean but worn. Every corner carried the quiet evidence of a mother trying to hold everything together. Her son, Ben, frowned over a math worksheet. "Mom, how do you do this one again?" Clara leaned over, smiling softly. "Let's try it together, okay? You're almost there." Her daughter Lily looked up from coloring. "Mommy, are we going back to that restaurant again? The one with the soft bread?" Clara hesitated, glancing at the empty fridge behind her. "Maybe one day, sweetheart. It's a special place." "But I liked it," Lily said, resting her chin on her hands. "You smiled a lot there." Clara's smile faltered for a moment before she nodded. "That's because it was a nice night." Meanwhile, across town, Ethan sat in his office again, but this time he wasn't working. He was scrolling through his phone, staring at a photo he'd quietly asked the restaurant manager to share with him, security footage of the night before. In it, Clara was laughing softly as her son made a funny face, her eyes tired but full of love. He didn't know why he kept looking at it. Something about that picture grounded him in a way his entire empire never had. He closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. The memory of his own mother flashed in his mind, the same quiet strength, the same soft eyes. She'd raised him alone, too, before the success, before the chaos. He realized with a pang that he hadn't thought about her in years. He opened his eyes again and whispered to himself, "She reminds me of you, Mom." For the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel like a CEO. He just felt human. And as the night deepened, one thought refused to leave him. Maybe he could do something more than just pay for a meal. Maybe he could change her life. The next morning, Clara woke up before sunrise. The alarm buzzed softly beside her bed, and she silenced it quickly so the kids wouldn't wake. She moved quietly through the small apartment, making sandwiches with the last few slices of bread and pouring water into an old plastic bottle. Her shift at the hotel started early, and she hated leaving her kids before they were even out of bed. She kissed each of them on the forehead before slipping out the door, whispering, "Be good, my loves. Mommy will be back soon." The morning air was cold, biting against her skin as she walked to the bus stop. She wrapped her thin coat tighter around herself and waited, watching the first hints of sunlight peek over the city skyline. A black car slowed nearby. The window rolled down, and to her surprise, a familiar face appeared, the man from the restaurant. Ethan. He leaned slightly toward her, his tone gentle. "Excuse me. You're Clara, right?" She froze, clutching her bag closer. "Yes, do I know you?" He offered a faint smile. "We met at the restaurant. I was sitting by the window." Her eyes widened slightly as recognition hit. "Oh, you were there that night." He nodded. "I hope you don't mind me finding you. I just wanted to make sure you and your kids were doing okay." Clara blinked, unsure what to say. "That's kind of you, but you didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said softly, cutting her off with sincerity. "That night, it reminded me of something important, something I'd forgotten." She looked down, uncomfortable but touched. "We're managing. It's not easy, but my kids are everything." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze warm. "I can see that. You're doing an incredible job." The bus arrived then, hissing to a stop beside her. She gave him a small smile. "Thank you, really, for what you did that night, and for this. It meant more than you know." He wanted to say more, to offer help, but she was already stepping onto the bus. As it pulled away, she turned once more to wave. Ethan stood there watching until the bus disappeared into traffic. Something about the way she smiled, tired yet full of quiet strength, stayed with him long after she was gone. For the first time in years, he found himself wanting to care again. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but out of genuine compassion. And though he didn't know it yet, that morning meeting wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of something far more beautiful. Later that day, Ethan couldn't focus on work. The numbers on his screen blurred together as his thoughts kept drifting back to Clara. There was something about her calm strength that stirred something deep inside him. A quiet, aching respect. By afternoon, he called his driver and asked to be taken to the part of town she lived in. He didn't know exactly why. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something more human, something his heart was finally beginning to feel again. As the car pulled onto the narrow street, Ethan looked out the tinted window and saw the small, aging apartment complex she called home. Children played outside, their laughter echoing through the cracked pavement while a few tired faces watched from open windows. Then he saw her, Clara, walking up the stairs with a laundry basket balanced on one hip and her daughter's little hand in the other. She looked exhausted but still managed to smile as the girl pointed to a stray cat curled by the door. Ethan stayed in the car for a long moment, just watching quietly. Every small detail about her life told a story, one of struggle but also of grace. He wasn't used to feeling this kind of ache. It wasn't pity. It was admiration. He finally stepped out, drawing a few curious glances from neighbors as his polished shoes touched the worn concrete. Clara turned, startled to see him there. "Mr. Cole?" she said, eyes widening. "What are you doing here?" He smiled lightly, raising a hand in reassurance. "I'm sorry for showing up like this. I just wanted to talk." She hesitated, clearly torn between politeness and discomfort. "This isn't exactly the best place for visitors," she admitted with an awkward laugh. "I don't mind," he said gently. "I wanted to understand on how you do it. Raising 2 kids, working so hard, and still smiling like that?" Clara blinked, taken aback by his sincerity. "You just keep going," she said quietly after a pause. "When you're a mom, giving up isn't an option." Her daughter tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Mommy, is he the angel from the restaurant?" Ethan smiled softly. "Maybe not an angel," he said, kneeling slightly to the girl's level, "but I think your mom might be one." Clara's eyes glistened, and for a second she didn't know what to say. Ethan straightened, clearing his throat. "Clara, I know this might sound strange, but I'd like to help. Not charity, just a chance, a job maybe, something stable." She shook her head immediately. "I can't accept that. You've already done enough." "It's not a favor," he said gently. "It's an opportunity. You deserve more than just surviving." For a moment silence hung between them, heavy, uncertain, yet full of something unspoken. Finally, Clara looked at him with soft, tired eyes. "You really don't have to do this," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I do." As he walked back to his car, she stood at her door watching him leave, confused, overwhelmed, but with a small flicker of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning, Clara stood nervously outside Ethan's company building, holding a small folder of documents, her resume, written neatly in her careful handwriting. The skyscraper loomed above her like a monument to another world, one she never imagined stepping into. She smoothed her worn blouse, took a deep breath, and walked through the glass doors. Inside, everything was polished. Marble floors, soft music, the faint scent of expensive perfume. Employees in crisp suits moved briskly, their eyes focused ahead. Clara felt completely out of place, but the receptionist greeted her kindly. "Good morning, ma'am. Do you have an appointment?" She nodded timidly. "Yes, with Mr. Cole." The receptionist's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she quickly smiled and made a call. Within minutes, an assistant appeared to escort her upstairs. When the elevator doors opened, Ethan was already waiting by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city below. He turned when he heard her footsteps and smiled warmly. "You came." Clara nodded, clutching her folder. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I wasn't sure I should." "I'm glad you did," he said gently. "You don't owe me anything, Clara. I just thought maybe you deserve a chance to start fresh." He led her to his office, spacious, full of sunlight, but somehow quieter than she expected. "I spoke to our HR department," he continued. "There's an opening in community relations, flexible hours, good pay. You'd be perfect for it." Clara's eyes widened. "Mr. Cole, I don't have a degree or corporate experience." He smiled faintly. "You don't need one to care. I've seen the way you are with people, the patience, the empathy. That's what the job needs." She hesitated, her voice soft. "Why are you doing this for me?" Ethan looked down for a moment before meeting her gaze. "Because once someone did it for my mother, and it changed everything." Her throat tightened as emotion flickered in her eyes. She nodded slowly, whispering, then, "I'll do my best," he smiled. A genuine, warm smile that softened his usually serious face. "That's all I ask." As she left the office later, clutching her new job offer, she paused outside the building and looked up at the sky. For the first time in a long while, the world didn't feel so heavy. And upstairs, Ethan watched her go from the window, a small smile touching his lips as he whispered to himself, "She deserves this." Neither of them knew it yet, but that single act of kindness was about to change both their lives forever. Weeks passed, and Clara quickly became a quiet favorite among the staff. Though she was shy at first, her warmth and sincerity drew people in. She treated everyone, from executives to janitors, with the same kindness, the same gentle respect that came naturally to her. Every morning she arrived early, bringing a small homemade lunch that she'd share with whoever forgot theirs. She stayed late when someone needed help, never complaining, never seeking credit. Slowly, the office, once cold and impersonal, began to feel a little more human. Ethan noticed. From his office window, he often caught glimpses of her, laughing softly with a coworker, comforting someone who'd had a bad day, helping organize small charity drives on her own time. There was something about the way she moved through life, quietly but purposefully, that inspired everyone around her, including him. One afternoon, he found her in the break room, carefully taping a note to a donation box. Collecting winter coats for local families, it read in her neat handwriting. He stepped closer, curious. You organized this? She turned a little surprised but smiling. Yes. Some of the staff mentioned they had old jackets they never used. I thought maybe we could make a difference. Ethan nodded, watching her for a moment. You already are. Her cheeks flushed slightly at his words. I just know how hard it is, she said softly. To feel like no one sees you struggling. Something in her tone hit him deeply. He didn't say anything, just gave a small nod before helping her tape another note to the box. That night, after everyone had left, Ethan stood in the quiet office, staring at the growing pile of donated clothes. He realized Clara hadn't just accepted the opportunity he'd given her. She'd transformed it into something far greater. Her presence had softened the company. The same employees who once only cared about deadlines now talked about volunteering, kindness, and small acts of care. And for Ethan, each day seeing her reminded him more of what he'd lost along the way, the simple goodness of human connection. But what he didn't know was that Clara had been carrying a secret, one she hadn't shared with anyone at work. A truth that would soon test everything they had begun to build. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Clara was still at her desk. The office lights glowed softly, and the faint hum of the city outside filled the silence. She rubbed her temples, exhausted. Her smile never showed it, but she'd been struggling again. Bills piling up, her son's medication running low, and now the landlord threatening a rent increase. Her phone buzzed. It was her daughter, Lily. Mommy, Ben's coughing again, the little voice said softly. He says his chest hurts. Clara's heart sank. Okay, sweetheart. Give him some water and keep him lying down. Mommy's coming home soon, okay? Okay. But can you bring him the honey medicine? Of course, baby. I'll be right there. She hung up quickly, packing her things in a rush. Her eyes stung with tears she didn't have time to wipe away. She'd been trying so hard to stay strong, to make the new job work. But it still felt like she was barely holding life together. As she turned to leave, Ethan appeared in the hallway. Clara, you're still here? She froze, forcing a smile. Just finishing up some reports. I was about to head out, but he saw it. The tremble in her voice, the redness in her eyes. He stepped closer, concern softening his tone. Is everything okay? She hesitated, shaking her head slightly. It's nothing, just a long day. Clara, he said quietly, you don't have to pretend. Her composure cracked. She bit her lip, then whispered, my son's sick again. The medicine's expensive and rent just went up. I thought this job would fix everything, but I'm still behind. Ethan's chest tightened. Without a word, he took out his phone, made a quick call, and within minutes his driver was waiting outside. Come on, he said gently. I'll take you home. She shook her head. I can't ask you. You're not asking, he interrupted softly. Let me help. Reluctantly, she followed him. During the ride, she sat silently beside him, staring out the window as tears slipped down her cheeks. Ethan said nothing. He simply listened to the quiet sound of her pain. When they arrived, he stepped out first, carrying the small grocery bag she always brought to work. Inside the apartment, he saw the peeling wallpaper, the thin blankets, and two sleepy children waiting on the couch. Ben coughed weakly, and Ethan knelt beside him. Hey, buddy, he said gently. You'll feel better soon, okay? Clara's voice broke as she whispered, Thank you for not turning away. Ethan looked up at her then, and in that moment, something changed between them. It wasn't about wealth or charity anymore. It was about two souls, both scarred by life, finding something familiar in each other's pain. And for the first time, Ethan didn't just feel pity. He felt purpose. The next morning, Sunlight spilled through the window of Clara's small apartment, painting the room in soft gold. Ben was asleep, his breathing finally calm, while Lily quietly drew on a scrap of paper beside him. Clara sat nearby, exhausted but relieved. When she looked up, she saw Ethan standing by the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. He'd stayed the night on the couch, refusing to leave until he knew her son was okay. "You didn't have to stay," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "I wanted to." She took the cup from him, her hands brushing his for a moment, a small touch but full of warmth. "You've done so much already, Mr. Cole. I don't even know how to thank you." "Ethan," he said gently. "Just Ethan." She nodded a little shyly. "Ethan." For a moment, silence filled the room, not awkward but peaceful, the kind of silence that felt safe. Then Lily got up, walking over to Ethan with the paper she'd been drawing on. "I made this for you," she said proudly. He took it carefully. On the paper was a crayon sketch of a man, a woman, and 2 children, all holding hands beneath a big, bright sun. "That's you," Lily explained, pointing to the man. "You helped Mommy smile again." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "It's beautiful, Lily, thank you." When Clara saw it, tears filled her eyes, not from sadness but from something deeper. Gratitude. Hope. The quiet realization that kindness could rebuild things she thought were gone forever. Later that week, Ethan called her to his office again. She assumed it was about work, but when she entered, she saw a folder waiting on his desk, and beside it, a set of house keys. "What's this?" she asked, startled. Ethan smiled softly. "A new start. There's a small house near the park. Quiet, safe, with a garden for the kids. It's yours." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Ethan, I can't." "Yes, you can," he said gently. "You've earned it. You've inspired everyone here, and reminded me what really matters." Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she covered her mouth, shaking her head. "You don't even know what this means to us." He stepped closer, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I think I do." That weekend, Clara and her children moved into their new home. As she stood in the doorway watching her kids laugh and run through the small backyard, she turned and saw Ethan by the gate, smiling quietly, hands in his pockets. She walked toward him, her eyes shining. "You changed our lives, Ethan." He shook his head. "No, Clara. You reminded me what a life is." And for a long moment they just stood there. 2 people who had once been strangers, now bound by something far greater than circumstance. Not charity, not luck, but the simple, extraordinary power of compassion.